Liam Carter sat alone in the quiet living room of his mother's house, the pale light of early morning slipping through the tall windows. The sound of the ocean outside was steady and soothing, but did nothing to calm the weight sitting heavily on his chest. He hadn't planned on coming back here. Not like this. Not as a man who had failed. At 28, Liam had hoped to be further along. His design studio in Portland had been his dream, a small space filled with sunlight and creativity, where he and two friends had poured everything they had into bringing unique visual projects to life. But dreams didn't always survive invoices, market shifts, or clients who vanished without paying. After 3 exhausting years and mounting debt, the studio had finally closed. His partners had found jobs elsewhere. Liam had found nothing but silence and a stack of bills. So when his mother, Janet, announced she was leaving for Brazil to spend 6 months volunteering with a community health project, something inside him had twisted. She had always been a strong one, practical, thoughtful, and endlessly supportive. She didn't judge when he told her the business had failed. She simply hugged him, told him she believed in him, and handed him the keys to her beach house in Cannon Beach. "Take care of it while I'm gone," she said. "It needs a little love." He told himself he would fix things. He would use the time to figure out a plan. Maybe pick up freelance work. Maybe get out of debt. Maybe finally catch his breath. But things hadn't gotten better. 3 weeks after she left, Liam opened his online banking app and stared at the red numbers. He had maxed out every card. His landlord was demanding back rent. His car was barely running. And worst of all, his pride kept him from asking anyone for help, including his mother. He sat at the small kitchen table and stared at the folder in front of him. It held the sale agreement. A buyer had offered a fair price for the beach house. More than fair, in fact. The market in Cannon Beach had jumped recently. He told himself it was temporary. He would sell it, pay off everything, start fresh. Maybe even buy it back before she returned. She would never have to know. It wasn't theft, he reasoned. It was survival. And wasn't she always telling him to do what you need to do? But as he signed the final page, something in his stomach turned. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible sense of something being off. The house had always felt like more than just property to her. She came here every summer, every long weekend, every time she needed peace. She had filled it with handmade quilts, local art, books tucked into every corner. She kept journals here, her old record player, things that mattered. Still, she had left it in his care. By the time the notary left and the digital transfer completed, the deed was no longer in her name. Liam was out of debt. He was even able to put aside enough to last him the next few months. He returned to the house one last time to gather a few remaining items. The new owner, a woman named Teresa Langford, was due to take possession in a few days. As he walked through the rooms, a strange sense of finality clung to him. He ran his fingers across the bookshelf, paused at the fireplace, opened the linen closet where she kept the sea blue towels she always said reminded her of the Pacific. He stopped in the hallway and looked at the door to the guest room. It was closed. For some reason, he didn't open it. He left a short note on the kitchen counter. Take care of it. It meant a lot to her. Then he closed the front door, locked it, and walked away. What he didn't realize was that the house wasn't just a place his mother loved. It was part of something she had never spoken about, something quietly important, and selling it had set more in motion than he could have imagined. He would soon learn that some houses are more than wood and stone. Some hold stories that do not want to be forgotten. The morning sun was barely stretching across the horizon when Liam's phone buzzed with a notification. He'd been sleeping on the couch in his small apartment above a coffee shop, a temporary place he'd taken while figuring out his next move. The message was from the Postal Service, an alert that a piece of mail addressed to Janet Carter had arrived at his previous mailing address, the beach house. It struck him as odd. Janet hadn't received anything in weeks, and certainly not since she'd left for Brazil. Curious, and with a vague sense of duty, Liam decided to swing by and pick it up before Teresa officially moved in. By the time he reached Cannon Beach, the familiar coastal mist was beginning to burn off, revealing a crisp, clear sky. Teresa wasn't home when he arrived, so he let himself in using the old keys she temporarily left with the realtor. The house already felt different, less like his mother's haven, more like a stranger's project. Some of the art was gone, the throw blankets removed. Furniture shifted slightly out of rhythm with the way Janet had left it. It was subtle, but it was enough. The envelope was sitting on the hallway table, resting neatly on top of a few old magazines. It was addressed to Janet in careful, cursive handwriting. No return address. No stamp. Someone had hand-delivered it. He frowned and turned the envelope over. The flap was sealed. He hesitated, unsure if he should open it. But his mother was thousands of miles away, and this had come after the sale. He could always tell her about it later. He slipped a finger under the flap and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Please do not make changes to the house. Some things were left as they are for a reason. If you are reading this, I trust you still remember what we discussed. If not, tread carefully. There was no signature, no date, no hint of who had written it or why. Liam read it twice, then a third time, feeling a quiet discomfort settle in his chest. He folded the note and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Maybe it was an old friend of Janet's. Maybe someone local who didn't realize she had left. He left the house without touching anything else and drove home. Over the next week, more letters arrived. The second one came 3 days later, once again without a stamp or return address. This time, it was waiting at his apartment's front door, tucked beneath the welcome mat. You should not have sold the house. Some places carry memory. Some memory needs space to rest. Liam stared at the words, uneasy. It didn't feel like a threat, exactly, but it was too strange to ignore. He texted his Aunt Rachel to ask if she knew anyone who had been especially close to Janet during her time at the beach house. Rachel replied a few hours later with a short message. Your mom had lots of guests over the years. Writers, teachers, people healing from different things. But she never talked much about specifics. Why? Liam didn't respond. The third letter came 5 days later, this time delivered to the coffee shop below his apartment. The barista, Jamie, handed it to him casually with his drink. Something for your mom? She asked, glancing at the envelope. It came this morning, no postage. He nodded, muttering a thanks, and took it upstairs before opening it. Not everything was yours to sell. If you don't understand now, you will soon. Liam sat down heavily on the couch, the letter trembling in his hands. The tone was still not overtly threatening, but it had shifted, more pointed, more urgent. Someone was clearly watching. Someone knew where he lived. Someone had an emotional attachment to the house his mother had kept so closely guarded. He decided to reach out to Janet. That night, he composed a message carefully, not wanting to worry her. Hey, Mom, everything okay in Brazil? Random question. Did anyone ever leave letters at the beach house for you? I've gotten a few strange notes here. Not signed, all talking about the house. Wondering if it's some old neighbor or something. She didn't reply immediately, which wasn't unusual. Internet service was spotty where she was, and she often sent voice messages instead of texting. Liam waited 2 days before hearing anything. Her reply came as a short audio message, crackling with static but clearly her voice. Letters? No, at least not that I can think of. Maybe someone left something behind. I'll think about it. But don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure it's nothing serious. Her tone was calm, but he could hear a note of hesitation. She paused before ending the message, almost as if she was going to say more, then decided against it. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, the letters spread out on the coffee table in front of him. The handwriting was the same on all three, elegant, deliberate, like someone used journaling or writing by hand. They weren't random, and the fact that they were showing up where he lived now, it meant someone had followed him or had known where he was going to be. The next morning, he drove back to the beach house. Teresa was home this time, her car parked in the driveway. She greeted him with a polite smile, surprised to see him. Hey, she said, everything okay? Liam hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, just some mail came from my mom. I've been getting these strange letters. Figured maybe someone local was dropping them off. Teresa frowned slightly. Letters? Like from a neighbor? Not sure. No return address. just weird messages about the house. She tilted her head, thoughtful. Well, I did find something odd, actually, in the closet by the stairs. It was sealed with duct tape and labeled Private 1991. Looked old. I haven't opened it. Wasn't sure if it was meant to be thrown out. Liam's heart picked up. Can I see it? She nodded and led him inside. The house was still familiar enough to make him feel strange being there. Teresa had started to decorate, but the bones of the place were unchanged. The closet she mentioned was one Janet rarely used. Liam barely remembered it at all. Teresa opened the door and pointed to a plain cardboard box on the floor. It was weathered but intact, the duct tape yellowed with age. On the top in black marker were the words, Private 1991, do not discard. He knelt beside it and ran his hand over the top. You mind if I take it? He asked. Of course not. Honestly, I wasn't sure what to do with it. If it belonged to your mom, it's yours. He thanked her, lifted the box carefully, and carried it to his car. Driving back, the box sat beside him in the passenger seat, radiating mystery. He didn't open it until he was back in his apartment, seated at the table with the letters beside him. Inside were 3 photo albums, a bundle of yellowed papers tied with string, and a thick manila folder labeled, Retreat Participants, Personal Notes. He untied the bundle first. Letters, dozens of them, each addressed to Janet, dated from the early 1990s through the early 2000s. Some were typewritten, others handwritten, and all carried a tone of deep gratitude. Thank you for giving me the space to breathe again. You didn't know it, but those mornings on the porch saved my life. I never thought a weekend retreat could change me, but it did. You changed me. Liam felt a chill crawl down his spine. These weren't just notes. These were pieces of people's lives, left in his mother's care. And now, somehow, they were surfacing again. He picked up the manila folder and opened it. Inside were brief handwritten notes, summaries of guests with names, dates, sometimes just first initials, observations, reflections. A few of them had a single word underlined at the bottom. Keep. That word echoed in his mind. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. The house hadn't just been a sanctuary for Janet. It had been one for many others. A place of quiet healing. A secret kept, not out of shame, but protection. The letters were coming, because someone wanted to protect that legacy, and he had sold it. Liam didn't sleep that night. The photo albums and letters remained spread across the table, their presence both comforting and haunting. It was as if he'd stumbled upon a chapter of his mother's life that had existed just outside his line of sight for years, a quiet constellation of strangers who had found solace under the same roof he'd sold to a woman he barely knew. The next morning, while pouring himself a cup of coffee and trying to shake the lingering fog in his head, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Hi, Liam. This is Teresa Langford. Sorry to bother you. Just had a few questions about the house. Nothing urgent, just curious. Let me know if you're free to chat. His stomach tightened. He hesitated for a few moments, then replied, Sure. What's up? The phone rang less than a minute later. He answered. Hi. Thanks for getting back to me, Teresa said, her voice friendly but carrying an undercurrent of caution. I've been doing some cleaning and reorganizing, just settling in. Everything's fine, but, well, a few things stood out. I thought maybe you'd know more. Liam stood at the window, staring out at the quiet street below. Like, what? Well, she began slowly. In the back bedroom, what I think was used as a guest room, there's a closet. Small, nothing fancy. But it was sealed from the inside. Like, actually screwed shut. I had to remove the panel to get it open. Liam frowned. I didn't know about that. That's what I figured. Anyway, inside there was nothing dangerous or weird. Just shelves. But there were several boxes, labeled by year. Most were empty, but one was marked 91. I didn't open it. Felt private, I guess. Liam's mouth was dry. Yeah, I actually have that one. You let me take it last week. Oh, right. That's good, she said, then paused. There's something else. It's probably nothing, but it struck me as unusual. There's a drawer in the hallway cabinet. It's lined with lavender paper, and taped to the bottom was a list. Handwritten, kind of faded. It said something like, "Things to remember if I ever leave this place." Do you know anything about that? Liam sat down at the table. No, but it sounded like something my mom might have written. That's what I thought. I put it back where I found it. Didn't feel right moving it. But it got me wondering, was this house used for something? I mean, more than just being a home? The question hung in the air. Liam's first instinct was to lie, to say no, to protect the privacy of his mother's past, even from someone who now legally owned the space that held so much of it. But something about Teresa's tone, curious, not invasive, made him pause. "I think, maybe," he said carefully, "I found some letters. A lot of them, actually, from people who stayed there. They were thanking my mom, saying the house helped them." Teresa was quiet for a few seconds. So she ran a retreat? I'm not sure if it was formal, but yeah, something like that. She never really told me. Another silence, longer this time. Then, that explains a few things. Like, what? Teresa gave a short laugh, but it wasn't amused. When I first visited the house, something about it felt calm. I thought it was just the beach or the way it was decorated. But even empty, it still feels that way. Like it was soaked in people's memories. It's hard to describe. Liam didn't respond. He understood exactly what she meant. "I hope I'm not crossing any lines," she said. "I just think there's something special about the place. If your mom was doing something meaningful there, I'd like to honor that." Her sincerity caught him off guard. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "You're not crossing any lines." "Good. Well, if you come across anything else that seems connected to the house or the people who stayed there, I'd be interested. No pressure, of course." He thanked her, and they ended the call. The conversation lingered in his mind the rest of the day. Teresa's questions weren't aggressive. She wasn't trying to dig up dirt. She genuinely wanted to understand what the house had meant to the people who passed through it, and what it might still mean. Later that afternoon, Liam went back to the manila folder and opened a different section. There were lists of names, a few phone numbers, scattered notes written in a precise, familiar hand. His mother's. Some pages were organized by retreat dates, while others seemed more personal, perhaps thoughts she hadn't intended for anyone to see. One particular name kept appearing, M. Jensen. There were small comments beside each mention. Arrived late, stayed longer than planned, quiet, needed silence, asked about the garden, spent hours walking the bluff, left a letter, said it wasn't goodbye. Liam didn't recognize the name. He searched through the rest of the folder, but found nothing else about this person. No first name, no contact information, just those lines, scattered among others. He returned to the bundle of letters. After almost an hour of scanning, he found one signed M. Jensen. It was typewritten, dated April of 1992. "Janet, you probably won't remember everything we talked about. That's okay. You didn't have to say much for me to feel understood. That porch, that tea, the silence. It was enough. I came broken and I left less so. I'm not ready to go home yet, but I think I will be eventually. Please don't change anything about the house. I don't mean the paint or the furniture. I mean the quiet, the intention. It matters." Liam set the letter down and exhaled slowly. It wasn't just a place for healing. It had become a place of memory, a record of people who needed to press pause on their lives. He could imagine them now, arriving with heavy bags, unsure what they were looking for, then slowly realizing that the house was the answer they hadn't known they needed. And now he had given it away. That evening, he called Rachel. "Aunt Rachel," he said when she answered. "Did Mom ever tell you she ran some kind of retreat?" There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Why are you asking now?" He explained. Briefly, the letters, the notes, the phone call from Teresa. When he finished, she sighed. "She didn't talk about it much," Rachel said. "But yes, I knew. After your dad left, she went through a hard time. The beach house gave her something to focus on. She started inviting women she knew, friends of friends, people who were struggling. Then it became more organized. Small weekends, writing sessions, self-reflection. But she didn't advertise. It was all word of mouth. Why didn't she tell me? She didn't want it to be about her, Rachel said gently. She wasn't trying to run a business. She was just giving people a place to breathe. Some of those people became her closest friends. Others she never saw again. Liam was quiet. She told me once, Rachel continued, that healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just silence, good food, and knowing no one expects anything from you for a few days. That's what she gave them. Liam felt a tightness in his throat. I think I made a mistake, he said softly. Rachel didn't answer right away. Then do what you're going to fix it. The next time Teresa called, her voice was more reflective and curious. She didn't launch into her questions right away. Instead, she asked how Liam was doing. It surprised him how easily her tone had shifted from new homeowner to something gentler, more aware. He told her he was managing, though that wasn't entirely true. I found something, she said after a pause. In the attic. I thought everything had already been cleared out, but one of the contractors working on the insulation pulled out an old box tucked behind a beam. It's clearly been there for years. Has your mother's name on it. Liam sat forward in his chair. You're sure it's hers? Positive. Same handwriting as the other notes. It's labeled personal, do not toss. Figured you want to come take a look. An hour later, Liam pulled up outside the beach house. He hadn't planned on returning so soon, but there was no question in his mind. He needed to see what had been found. Teresa greeted him at the door with the box already in her hands. It was medium-sized, sealed with thin twine and brittle with age. The cardboard had softened slightly from humidity, and there was a faint scent of cedar and lavender when he took it. I didn't open it, she said. Felt like it wasn't mine to open. He thanked her, holding the box close, then carried it to his car. He didn't open it until he was back in his apartment, seated once more at the same kitchen table that had become the staging ground for his mother's hidden past. Inside were 3 old photo albums, a bundle of letters wrapped in blue ribbon, and a small leather-bound notebook. The albums came first. Liam opened them carefully, page by page, finding photographs that spanned decades. Some were the beach house in various stages of decoration and renovation, while others showed groups of women gathered on the back porch, around the fireplace, standing in the garden. They weren't posed portraits, but candid moments. People laughing, walking, sipping tea, scribbling in notebooks. Each image was dated in small, handwritten notes. The oldest photo was from 1989. The newest was from 2 years ago. As he flipped through the pages, a quiet story unfolded. One of community, quiet celebration, renewal. Faces changed, seasons shifted, but the sense of calm in every image remained constant. The house was more than a structure. It was a witness. Then came the letters. These were different from the others he had already found. These weren't addressed to his mother. They were from her. Some were written to people whose names he recognized from the previous folder. Others were to names he'd never seen. A few were clearly never sent, sealed only by a single piece of folded paper around them. Reading them felt like listening to a side of his mother he had never known, vulnerable, wise, deeply human. One letter, dated July of 1997, read, Dear Elise, you left in silence, which I understand. Sometimes leaving quietly is the loudest thing we can do. I just want to say thank you for trusting the house, for trusting me. You reminded me that even the ones who seem the strongest are still fighting something. Wherever you are, I hope the sea still calls to you. Another letter, addressed simply to A, read, The chair on the back porch still creaks the way it did when you first sat there and told me your story. Every now and then, when the wind moves just right, I think I can hear your laugh echo against the walls. You were the first to teach me that the house listens, even when I can't. Liam placed the letters down slowly, absorbing the intimacy they carried. These weren't just exchanges. They were emotional keepsakes, like pressed flowers hidden in books, left there to be discovered long after the petals had dried. At the bottom of the box was the leather-bound notebook. It was soft from use, its edges worn. Inside, in his mother's familiar handwriting, were entries, some just a few lines, others full paragraphs. They weren't dated. Instead, each began with a first name or an initial, followed by observations, thoughts, fragments of conversations. Mila stayed up all night writing. Never let me read a word, but in the morning she looked different, lighter. She cried when she left. Howard didn't speak much, sat on the steps and watched the tide roll in every afternoon, left behind a sketch of the cliffs. I keep it in the kitchen. Tara brought her son, said it was the first time she'd been alone with him since the divorce. They'd built a driftwood fort together. She said it was the first thing they'd built that hadn't fallen apart. Liam kept reading, turning page after page. The stories blurred into each other, small lives intersecting with a single location, like birds landing briefly before taking flight again. But one entry made him stop. Liam first visited at age 4, played with seashells, fell asleep on the couch with chocolate on his face. I wondered then if he'd remember this place as more than just a vacation spot. I hope he will. I hope he'll understand one day why I needed this house. Not to hide, but to hold space for others when I couldn't hold anything else. His breath caught in his throat. He closed the notebook slowly and sat in silence, the weight of it all pressing gently but firmly against his chest. It was never just a retreat. It was never just a quiet escape from the noise of the world. For his mother, it had been her offering, her quiet answer to pain and disconnection, both her own and others. The memory of selling the house burned hotter now. But so did a new thought. Perhaps the stories, the people, the energy of the place weren't gone. Perhaps they were still there, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be honored. The next morning, Liam called Teresa. I went through the box, he said. There's a lot more than I expected. I had a feeling, she said. There's a record of everything my mom did, everyone who came. Photos, letters. It's a whole history. There was a pause. Would you be willing to share some of it? Liam hesitated, but only for a second. Yeah, I think it's time someone else knew. They agreed to meet at the beach house the following weekend. Liam gathered the photo albums and selected a few letters and notes to bring with him. He left the most personal ones behind for now. Some things still felt too sacred. When he arrived, Teresa had cleared the living room table. She made tea, the same kind his mother used to brew, and they sat in the sunlit room with the ocean murmuring in the distance. Liam spread the items out in front of them. As Teresa flipped to the pages of the photo albums, her face shifted, curiosity giving way to reverence. She read a letter aloud, then another. They didn't speak much. There was no need. The silence between them was full. By the time they reached the final album, Liam looked around the room and saw it differently. The fireplace, the windows, the worn-wood floors. They weren't relics. They were pieces of a living story. And now, maybe, there was a chance to let that story continue. The following Thursday afternoon, Liam drove to his Aunt Rachel's cottage just outside Portland. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and the first hints of autumn. It was an impulsive visit. He had called ahead and asked if she had time to talk. He needed answers, not guesses. After uncovering his mother's letters, the retreat notes, the photograph in the notebook, there was still a growing sense that something remained unsaid. And if anyone would know, it was Rachel. She greeted him at the door with a long, quiet hug, then led him into the kitchen, where the kettle was already hissing softly on the stove. They sat with tea and scones, sunlight stretching across the wooden table in narrow bands. Liam didn't waste time. I've read a lot of the letters, he said. And her notes. There's more than just stories in them. There's something deeper. Rachel nodded slowly. I thought you might feel that. Liam glanced at her. Then why didn't she ever tell me about any of this? The retreats, the letters, the people who passed through that house? Rachel took a long sip from her mug. Because it wasn't a chapter she thought you needed to carry. She let me live there, he said, his voice low. She left it in my hands. And I sold it. Rachel reached out and placed her hand over his. You made a mistake, but it doesn't erase what the house was, or what it might still be. He looked down at the table. I keep thinking about the people who came through there, about why they came. And one name keeps popping up, Someone she wrote about more than once. No full name, just M. Jensen. There's an entry about this person staying longer than expected. She made it sound important. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She leaned back in her chair and looked out the window, as though weighing the right way to begin. After a long pause, she turned back to him. There was someone, she said quietly, a woman named Margaret Jensen. She came to the house during the early days, back when your mom was still figuring out what the place could be. It wasn't an official retreat yet. Margaret wasn't just a guest. She was the one who helped your mother realize the house could be more than a retreat. Liam leaned forward. What do you mean? Rachel folded her hands in her lap. Your mom had just come through a rough time. The marriage had ended. Her confidence was shattered. You were still little, and she was trying to piece herself together. She brought you to the beach house this summer, thinking it would be a quiet escape. One afternoon, she ran into Margaret on the trail near the bluff. They got to talking. Margaret had been recently widowed. They ended up sitting on the porch for hours, just sharing stories. At the end of that weekend, Margaret asked if she could come back sometime, and your mom said yes. Liam absorbed that, watching the steam rise from his mug. Over the years, Margaret returned often, Rachel continued. Sometimes just for a night, other times for a week or more. She was a writer, a teacher, and someone who carried a lot of private grief. She encouraged your mom to let others come, to make space for people who needed time, but not necessarily therapy, just permission to stop and be. Did she leave letters too? Liam asked. Yes, Rachel said. Margaret wrote more than anyone. I think your mom kept every word. But they weren't just letters of gratitude. They were conversations in ink, reflections, confessions. Liam was silent. He thought of the box, the folded papers, the photos, a lifetime of invisible connections held in fragile pages. Margaret stopped visiting a few years ago, Rachel added softly. Her health declined, but your mom never forgot her. She used to say, if it weren't for Margaret, I would have sold the house long ago. Liam sat back in his chair, heart pounding with the strange weight of discovery. She never told me any of this. She wasn't hiding it, Rachel said gently. She just didn't think you'd understand, until maybe one day you needed to. A silence settled between them again. Liam stared down at the tabletop, tracing a groove in the wood with his thumb. Can I ask you something else? He said. Why didn't she run retreats anymore? The letters stopped after a certain year. The notes do too, like it just ended. Rachel exhaled. It was gradual. People stopped coming as often. Some moved on. Others got what they needed and didn't return. And your mom started writing more, volunteering more. The house stayed open in a way, but it was quieter. She never closed the door. She just stopped advertising that it was open. Liam considered that. He'd always thought of the beach house as a background detail in his mother's life, a quiet place she loved. Now he saw that it had been the center of something bigger, something invisible but deeply felt. As he prepared to leave, Rachel followed him to the door. You know, she said, her voice soft, what you're doing now, reading the letters, talking to Teresa, it matters. The house may be out of your hands legally, but not emotionally, not historically. You can still carry what it stood for. He nodded, and she reached up to hug him again, tighter this time. On the drive home, Liam thought about Margaret Jensen. He thought about the early days of the house, before the notes and the folders and the careful record-keeping, before his mother had found a rhythm in holding space for others. He imagined her on that porch, when a near stranger turned friend, discovering something new about herself, something vital. The next morning, as he sat once again at his cluttered kitchen table, Liam pulled out the letters and the notebook and began organizing everything chronologically. There was too much to keep scattered. He found an old binder and began slipping the letters into protective sleeves, labeling each one with a date and, when available, a name. It took hours, but the process was soothing, like reconstructing a map of stories, each one leading back to the same place. Later that evening, Teresa called again. I've been thinking, she said, about what you told me, about your mother, the retreat, Margaret, all of it. Liam listened. "I don't want to just live in that house," she said. "I want to understand what it was. And maybe, if you're willing, I'd like to help preserve that somehow. A memory project. Something small. Not to make money. Just to honor what it meant to people." Liam felt something unlock in his chest. "I'd like that," he said. "I think she would too." They agreed to meet again the following week. And as he hung up, he felt, for the first time in months, that he wasn't just cleaning up a mistake. He was building something. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a continuation of what had once been quietly, powerfully true. A few days later, on a crisp Friday morning, Liam stepped into a small cafe near the coast, a narrow, sunlit space with pale blue walls and windows overlooking the dunes. He had arranged to meet someone who claimed to know Janet's past retreats, someone who had once stayed in her house years ago. He wasn't sure what to expect. A friendly face, a stranger, someone curious. But he felt he needed to see someone who had lived part of that hidden history. He chose a table by the window and ordered tea. His heart pounded while he waited. He looked over his notes, the names from his mother's letters, the initials, the memories recorded in that leather notebook. He told himself this meeting would shed light, not stir ghosts. A woman entered then, walking slowly, carrying a bag and a notebook. She was older now, hair silver at the temples, wearing a cardigan and a calm, assured smile. She paused at the door, scanning the cafe until her eyes landed on him. That recognition passed between them, a faint flicker of memory. She approached. "Liam Carter?" she asked, voice soft but clear. He stood, awkwardly. "Yes, you must be Marion Wells. I stayed at your mother's retreat many years ago. I wanted to talk to her again, but life got in the way." He gestured to the seat opposite. "Please, thank you for coming." Marion sat down and placed her bag gently beside her. For a moment, she looked around the cafe, absorbing the light and the sound of waves in the distance. "You know, I never thought I'd get to have this conversation," she said. "When I saw your name in that local newsletter, some project trying to preserve your mother's legacy, I waited to contact you. I wasn't sure if you'd even want to talk to someone from that past." Liam shook his head. "I want to understand what the house was meant to be, what it did for you." Marion nodded, then pulled out a small folder from her bag. She opened it and slid it across the table toward him. Inside were 2 photographs, a letter, and a faded postcard on ocean sunset. "This is from 1996, she said, pointing to one photo. It showed a group of women seated on the deck outside that beach house, smiling, chatting, cups of tea on small tables. The other photo was a closer one. Marion sitting near a window, notebook in hand, her gaze lost in thought. "You'll see me in the crowd," Marion said. "That retreat changed me more than I can say." He picked up the photos and the letter. The letter was addressed to Janet. He recognized the same elegant script. He unfolded it carefully. "Dear Janet, you gave me something precious that weekend. Space. It sounds strange to say, but nobody asked me to fix anything. Nobody demanded more of me. I cried on your porch. I wrote in your living room. You listened. I left lighter. Thank you always, M. Wells." Liam looked at Marion. "You remember that weekend?" She nodded, eyes watery. "Yes. I came with heavy things in my heart. A marriage that had crumbled, children distant. I found your mother through a friend of a friend, a person who said, if you ever need a break, she has space. I arrived and didn't know what to expect, but something about the house said, you can breathe." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I remember walking out to Bluff early one morning, notebook in hand, just writing. Tears fell. That sound, the wind, the sea, it felt like someone else was whispering. I was scared to leave, but I did, eventually, because life demanded it. But I carried that weekend with me." Liam watched her. He had his mother's eyes, felt her gravitas in the way Marion spoke. "Did you ever write to her again?" "Yes," Marion said, her voice soft. "Several times. I left letters. One she never replied to. Maybe she already knew what I'd say. But I kept her in my heart. I never forgot that house, or what she did there. He asked her about the names he saw often: Margaret Jensen, M. Jensen. Marion's face changed. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Margaret and your mom were very close early on," she said. "Margaret helped your mom see what could be possible. She urged her to open the space not just to one or two, but to more people, quietly, carefully. Margaret didn't come often after the turn of the millennium, but in the early years she was a guide in many ways." Liam remembered the entries in his mother's notebook, the way Margaret's name recurred. This confirmed it. "Did you know Margaret well?" Marion nodded faintly. "We met at one of those retreats." She listened deeply. She had gone through loss and hardship of her own. She didn't preach. She walked beside people. "Your mother learned much from her. I think part of why your mother kept records, kept the house so steady, was because of what Margaret taught her. That people's stories matter. That safe space matters." A moment of silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken connection. Then Marion reached into her bag again and produced a small journal, her own. She handed it to Liam. "I want you to have this," she said. "It's mine, yes, but it contains reflections from that time, things I thought I'd lost. I want them to be part of whatever you do next." Liam took the journal. It was worn, pages soft with age. He felt the weight of trust in that gesture. They sat quietly together, drinking their tea as the afternoon light softened. Marion asked questions about Teresa, about what Liam planned. He shared his idea of preserving his mother's legacy. She nodded, encouraged by the notion. "Whatever you do," Marion said, "make sure the voices are heard. Not just mine, not just Margaret's. Many walked through that house. Let them speak." Afterward, they parted with warm goodbyes. Marion promised to send him transcripts of her retreat journals and photographs she hadn't brought. Liam watched her leave the cafe, her silhouette merging with the sunlight and sea breeze. Driving away, he felt a mix of gratitude and urgency. This visit had given him flesh and voice to the fragments he had uncovered. It was no longer a study of archives. It was living history, reaching toward him. That evening, he and Teresa met at the house. He brought Marion's journal, the photographs, and the folk stories she had shared. Teresa looked through them, her eyes shining. They read Marion's letter to Janet, aloud together. They listened, in silence, to the weight of memory. Teresa broke the quiet. "I want to help collect this. Record it, share it sensitively. Let people see their part in this story, if they wish." Liam nodded, thinking of the voices still waiting. Former guests, quiet letters unsent, memories tucked in drawers and notebooks. Each one had mattered. Each one had shaped that house more than the walls ever could. In the stillness of that evening, with only the ocean wind pressing against the windows, Liam realized that this house was never about possession. It was about persistence, of memory, of healing, of human connection stretched across years. And now it was as the steward. The air had shifted around the house. It wasn't something Liam could explain, not precisely. There were no flickering lights or eerie sensations, no whispers echoing through the hallways. But after weeks of piecing together his mother's quiet legacy, after speaking to Marion and holding her worn journal in his hands, the house felt alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. Not alive with noise or movement, but with presence, with memory. Teresa had agreed to let him return, not just to visit, but to search. Not for valuables or lost mementos, but for traces, things that might still be tucked away in forgotten corners. There was a mutual understanding between them now. Teresa, ever thoughtful, had even left the house for the afternoon, giving Liam the time and space to explore without interruption. It was the first time he'd been alone in the house since the sale, and the silence greeted him like an old friend. He stepped through the doorway slowly, keys in hand, and set his bag on the narrow table by the wall. The scent of the sea drifted through the open windows, mingling with the faintest trace of lavender and old wood. He started in the attic. The entrance was narrow, accessible by a pull-down ladder in the hallway ceiling. He climbed carefully, flashlight in hand, stepping onto the creaking wooden boards. The attic was warmer than the rest of the house, and thick with dust, but it was cleaner than he expected. Clearly Teresa had begun work up here, perhaps planning to renovate or expand the storage space. Liam moved slowly, checking behind boxes and along the beams. Some things had already been cleared out, but near the far corner, behind a stack of broken picture frames and a rusted lamp, he found an old metal file cabinet, short, with a latch but no lock. He pulled it forward, brushing dust from the top. The handle stuck slightly, but with a tug, the drawer opened. Inside were files, rows of manila folders, each labeled with a name, an initial, or a set of dates. Some folders were thin, others thick, bulging with notes. He pulled out the first one and flipped it open. A name was scrawled across the front. Nina R., September 1995. Inside were handwritten notes from Janet, observations, fragments, reflections. She cried during the second morning walk. Didn't explain why. Later wrote a poem on the porch. Said she hadn't written since college. Below that, a letter from Nina herself, folded neatly and addressed only to Jay. I needed silence. You gave it without asking why. I'll remember the rain on the roof and your quiet cup of tea in the morning. That mattered. Liam closed a folder and placed it beside him, then pulled another, Alan D., March 1999, and another, Elsa G., July 2003. Each folder revealed the same pattern. Notes from Janet, brief, personal, perceptive, and letters from those who had come, stayed, and left, leaving pieces of themselves behind. He lost track of time. The sun shifted behind the trees, casting long shadows through the slatted windows. The air cooled slightly, and still he stayed, folder after folder unfolding a version of his mother he had never fully understood. The quiet guide, the patient listener, the woman who had turned her grief into a haven for others. In the bottom drawer of the cabinet, he found a folder unlike the rest. It wasn't labeled with a name or a date, but with a single word, underlined twice, unsent. Inside were letters clearly written by Janet, but never mailed. They were addressed to people from earlier folders, and some bore no name at all, just reflections, apologies, hopes. One letter, written in his mother's tight, careful handwriting, read, "To the woman who never returned. I still think of the way you stared at the ocean that last night. You didn't say goodbye. That's all right. I hope the sea gave you something. I hope you remember the light on the waves." Another was written to Margaret. "I kept the chair by the window. It still creaks. I've made tea in that kitchen 1,000 times since you left, but it's never tasted the same. I hope you know what you gave me. Without you, I might have sold it all. Thank you for being the first to believe this house could matter." Liam folded the letter back carefully and placed it inside the folder. He felt something press against his chest. Not sorrow exactly, but weight. The kind that came with understanding the size of someone's life after they were gone. He spent the rest of the afternoon cataloging what he could. When Teresa returned just before sunset, she found him at the kitchen table. The folders spread out in careful rows. He looked up as she entered. "I found the file cabinet. Attic corner. Must have been there for years." She walked closer, eyeing the folders. "That's more than I expected." "It's more than I knew existed," he said. It's like she was curating something, not just people's stories, but the experience itself. Teresa nodded, picking up a folder and glancing through it. "This isn't just personal. It's meaningful. This is oral history. Private, yes, but deeply human." They sat together for a while, reading silently. Liam let her hold the unsent folder, trusting her now with things he hadn't even told his aunt. Teresa didn't speak much. Her reverence was clear in her silence. As evening fell, Teresa lit a few candles, and they moved to the living room. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what this place could be again. Not a retreat, exactly, not in the same way, but maybe a space that still holds stories, a space that invites people to reflect, to write, to reconnect." Liam nodded slowly. "A place that doesn't forget what it was." She smiled. "Exactly." He looked around, the walls faintly glowing in the candlelight, the windows still open to the sound of waves. "There's one more thing," he said. "I want to scan all the letters, all the notes, create a digital archive, password protected, just for the people who were part of this." Teresa's eyes brightened. "Yes, that's a beautiful idea. I want them to see that their words mattered, he added. That they weren't just guests, they were part of something that lasted. That night, as he packed the folders into his car, Liam felt a sense of direction unlike anything he'd felt in months. Not repair, not regret, something else. Continuity. The house, the letters, the quiet, it could all still mean something, if they handled it with care. And he would. The following morning, Liam returned to the apartment, carrying the last of the file folders and Marion's journal. The air was crisp, and the early fog had begun to lift off the coastline, leaving dew trails on the windshield. Inside, the small table near his window had become an unofficial archive, piles of letters, photographs, and notes forming a quiet testament to something once deeply personal, now carefully unfolding in his hands. He sat with a mug of coffee growing cold beside him, reading through a letter he had found the previous day in a folder marked simply Layton, October 2002. Most of the other guests had written about healing, growth, quiet breakthroughs, or finding peace. But this one was different. The words on the page were heavier, more deliberate. Janet, this house allowed me to make the hardest decision of my life. For that, I will always be grateful. It gave me time I didn't know I needed, silence I spent years avoiding. I thought I had made up my mind before I arrived. I was convinced it was too late. But somehow, the way you listened, the way the sea just kept moving no matter how still I was, it helped me think again. I didn't reconcile with her that weekend. Not right away. But I took the first step when I left your house. I sent the letter. And that letter changed everything. I hope someday you'll understand what you gave me. Forever grateful, Marie. Liam read the letter twice. Then again, there was something about the way it was written, restrained but raw. He remembered his mother's quiet mannerisms, the way she used to sit at the kitchen table with a mug of tea and say nothing for long stretches, only to ask a single question that somehow got to the heart of everything. He could imagine her listening to this woman, not pushing, not guiding, just being there when needed. He flipped through the rest of Marie Layton's folder and found, tucked behind one of Janet's handwritten notes, a second letter. It was never sent, no envelope, no address. The pages were creased, written in a rushed but legible hand, and addressed not to Janet, but to Samantha. Sam, I wish I could tell you this in person, but I don't think I'm ready for that yet. I'm still afraid, still tangled in old things. But I want you to know I've thought about you every day, about your voice on the phone, about how angry you were, and how hurt. I don't blame you. I came to the coast thinking I needed distance, but all I found is how much I miss you. I want to make it right. If you'll let me, you don't have to forgive me now. Just know I'm trying to be someone you might want to speak to again. Love, Mom. Liam's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. He imagined the woman, Marie, sitting in one of the chairs by the window, pen in hand, pouring out years of regret and longing into a letter that may or may not have ever reached its destination. And then he realized something that made his stomach tighten. There was no record that this second letter had ever been mailed. It had been left behind, hidden in the folder, perhaps forgotten or intentionally placed there. Janet must have found it after Marie left, and she kept it. He closed the folder and stood abruptly, the weight of the letter in his chest. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced the living room, the image of that letter replaying in his mind. There was something about it, a lingering sense that this woman, whoever she was, had meant every word, and that the silence afterward had meaning too. Around midnight, unable to ignore the feeling any longer, Liam pulled out his laptop and opened a blank document. He stared at the cursor blinking against a white screen for several long minutes. Then he began to type. Mom, I've spent the last few weeks surrounded by people you never introduced me to. People who left pieces of their lives behind in letters, photos, notes. People who loved you without ever really knowing you, and somehow knew you better than I did. I thought the house was just a building. I thought I was doing the right thing when I sold it. But I was wrong. I see that now. I see how much you gave and how quietly you did it. I see how you built something that didn't need a name or a website or a brand. You built a sanctuary. You gave people space to pause and choose a different path. And now I think I'm starting to understand why you love that house so much. Why you protected it. Why you never really talked about it. It wasn't just yours. It belonged to every person who sat on the porch and watched the tide go out. I want to honor that. I hope you'll forgive me for letting it go too soon, but I promise I'll carry it forward. Love, Liam. He read it back once, then saved it and printed a single copy, folding it slowly and slipping it into an envelope. He didn't know yet when he would send it. He didn't even know if he would. But the act of writing it, of saying the words, felt necessary. The next morning, Liam returned to the beach house to meet Teresa. She was in the garden, wearing gloves and digging around the base of a rosemary bush. She stood as he approached. "I brought something," he said, holding out the letter. She took it but didn't open it. "For your mom?" He nodded. "I think you should leave it somewhere in the house," she said. "Somewhere that meant something to you. Not to her, not to anyone else, just to you." Liam considered that, then walked around the side of the house and up the old wooden stairs to the small loft room he used to sleep in as a boy. It hadn't changed much. Still narrow, still sun in the mornings, still carrying the scent of the sea in the wood. He placed the envelope on the windowsill and left it there. Back downstairs, Teresa was now seated on the porch, sipping tea. "I also found something this morning," she said, tucked behind the pantry. Another box, small, wooden, labeled only with the word keepsakes. "I haven't opened it." They brought the box inside and placed it on the table. Liam untied the leather strap, holding it closed. Inside were small items, tokens really, a pair of earrings made from sea glass, a page torn from a children's book, a painted stone, a dried sprig of lavender tied with blue thread, a Polaroid of two hands holding mugs, a paper crane. Each object came with a tiny tag written in Janet's hand. "She left this," Teresa said softly. "Maybe not for anyone specific. Maybe just to be found." Liam ran his hand over the objects, feeling the subtle weight of meaning in each one. He imagined people handing them to her in moments of gratitude, quiet farewell, or uncertain hope. They weren't just keepsakes. They were markers, reminders. Each one, a memory held in the curve of a shell, the page of a story, the press of ceramic in a photograph. He turned to Teresa. "I think we need a place for these. A space where people can come and remember, not a shrine, just a corner." She nodded. "We'll make it beautiful." That evening, as he left the house and looked back one last time, Liam realized something essential. The letters would always matter. The stories would always live. But the house, this house, was never about looking back. It was about giving people a reason to look forward again. The following week, Liam received a voicemail from his mother. Her voice, though distorted slightly by a poor connection, carried its usual warmth and steadiness. She had received his last message, the one about the letters and the things he had found. She didn't say much, just that she was glad he had gone back to the house, that she trusted him to take care of what remained, and that she would be returning sooner than expected. Liam listened to the message 3 times before deleting it. Janet's early return weighed on his mind as he stood once again in the beach house, surrounded by papers, boxes, and carefully labeled folders. The sun was high outside, casting long shadows across the floorboards. Teresa had left for the day to give him time alone, and he used the opportunity to revisit the small writing desk his mother had kept tucked in the guest room corner. It was an antique thing, oak, with narrow drawers and a fold-down top. Liam remembered it vaguely from his childhood, but had never paid it much attention. Now, something about it pulled at him. He opened the main compartment slowly and found a set of old spiral notebooks, their covers worn and edges curled. No names, no titles, just quiet artifacts of someone's inner world. He sat and began reading. Each notebook was filled with dated entries, spanning more than a decade. The early ones began shortly after the divorce from his father. Her handwriting shifted slightly over time, sharper in the early years, rounder and more relaxed in later ones. Some entries were only a paragraph, others filled pages. And somewhere in the middle of the third notebook, he found it, a passage dated February 23rd, 1991. "I don't know if I'm keeping the house for me or for the silence. Maybe both. The city is loud, and the loneliness is louder. But here, I can breathe. Not because it's peaceful, but because it feels like it knows how to hold someone who's not whole yet. There's something about this place. Maybe it's just wood and wind, but I feel safe when I sit on the porch and hear nothing but the sea. For now, that's enough. Liam paused, turned the page slowly. The next entry came a week later. I saw a woman today, crying in her car near the trail. I almost kept walking, but something stopped me. I asked if she was all right. She wasn't. I invited her for tea. She said yes. Her name was Margaret. The realization struck him with a quiet force. This was the beginning, not of a retreat, not of a program, just of something human. One woman reaching out to another at a time when they both needed it. He continued reading. Margaret told me she hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. She said she came here to disappear for a while, not forever, just until she could remember who she used to be. I didn't ask questions. I gave her tea and we sat on the porch. She didn't say much more, but when she left, she said, "You should let others come here. People need this." I laughed, but something about the way she said it stayed with me. Liam closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair. His mother hadn't designed this place to be anything more than a refuge for herself. But people like Margaret had helped her see its deeper potential. And Janet, quiet and observant as she always was, had simply kept the door open for whoever needed it whenever they arrived. He opened the drawer beneath the writing surface. Inside, he found another small journal. Unlike the others, this one wasn't filled with notes about guests or thoughts on solitude. It was more personal, more revealing. The first page began with a question written in bold letters. What does it mean to belong to a place? The entries that followed wrestled with that question. Not directly, not with answers, but through the exploration of memory. She wrote about her first visit to the coast before she owned the house. How she had driven aimlessly one day and ended up standing in the dunes, staring at the sea, feeling both completely alone and entirely at peace. She wrote about returning later with Liam as a toddler, how he had run straight into the wind, chasing seagulls, laughing without fear. She wrote about the first night they stayed in the house after buying it, sleeping on an air mattress in the living room with the fire crackling low and the sound of waves muffled by rain. I remember that night, she wrote. I remember thinking, we are safe, just for now. I hadn't felt that in years. Liam's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. She wrote about seasons passing, about people coming and going. She mentioned Rachel, Marion. Even Teresa's name appeared, years before Teresa had bought the house, listed as a friend of a guest who had once visited just for a weekend. But the most striking entry came near the end. I've kept this house because it reminds me who I am when I am not performing. When I am not mother, teacher, fixer, friend. When I am just Janet. I don't think people talk enough about the spaces that let us be only what we are. This one does that for me. I suppose that's why I let others in. Not to fix them, not to teach them, but because I knew what it felt like to be untethered, and I wanted to offer a place to land, even if only for a while. He sat in silence for a long time after that, listening to the house, to the waves, to the echoes in the boards beneath him. Later, as he packed the notebooks and returned them carefully to the drawer, he found a final note, loose, unbound, left as if waiting to be discovered. It was addressed simply to L, and dated 5 years ago. I don't know if you'll ever really understand what this house is to me. Maybe you're not supposed to. But if someday you find yourself here again, alone, wondering why I stayed, why I never sold it, know this. It isn't about the furniture or the porch or the view. It's about how this place held me when nothing else could. And maybe if you let it, it will do the same for you. Love, Mom. He folded the note and placed it gently in his pocket. Outside, the sun had dipped behind a curtain of mist, the light now soft and golden. Liam stepped onto the porch, breathing the cool air. He could still hear her voice, quiet, steady, shaped by years of listening. He didn't need to guess anymore. She had kept the house not out of nostalgia, not out of obligation, but because it had become a place that allowed her to return to herself. And by doing so, she had offered that same chance to others. The house had given her back her name, her breath, her stillness, and now, perhaps, it was giving the same back to him. The sky was overcast the day Janet returned. Liam stood at the edge of the driveway, watching as her cab pulled to a slow stop in front of the house. The trunk popped open, and the driver stepped out to unload her single, worn suitcase. For a long moment, Janet sat still in the back seat, one hand resting on the door handle, the other on her lap. Then, with deliberate calm, she opened the door and stepped out. Her hair was longer than Liam remembered, streaked with more silver, and she looked thinner, but not frail. She wore a simple navy coat and a soft scarf, and she stood silently for several seconds, taking in the house, the yard, the windows. Her eyes moved across the porch, then up to the loft window, then to her son. Liam didn't speak. He didn't move toward her. He simply waited. She smiled, faintly, and stepped forward. "Hi," she said. "Hi, Mom." There was a pause, and then she opened her arms. Liam crossed the space between them and hugged her tightly. For a few seconds, neither of them said a word. When they pulled apart, Janet studied his face with quiet affection. "You look different," she said. "Do I?" "Lighter," she said. "But tired." "That sounds right." He reached for her suitcase. "Let's go inside." They entered the house together, and as the door closed behind them, Liam felt a tension he hadn't realized he was holding begin to loosen. Janet moved slowly to the front hallway, her eyes taking in every detail. The rug, the artwork, the faint changes Teresa had made, the stack of old letters on the side table. She didn't comment. She simply observed. In the kitchen, Liam made tea. Janet sat at the table, watching the steam rise from her cup. Fingers curled loosely around the ceramic. "I know," Liam said at last, standing across from her. She looked up. "I know about the retreats, the letters, the people who stayed here. I know what this place was, what it meant, what you did." Janet nodded slowly, setting her cup down without drinking. "I figured you might, eventually." "I found everything," he said. "The notebooks, the unsent letters. Marion came to see me. She gave me her journal. Rachel filled in some of the blanks. And Teresa's been kind." Janet leaned back in her chair, thoughtful. "I always assumed you'd see the house one way," she said. "The way you knew it as a child. Long weekends, storybooks, hot cocoa and board games. I didn't expect you to see what it became." "I didn't," he admitted. "Not for a long time. And now," he hesitated, "now I see what I sold." Janet didn't flinch. She folded her hands. "I was angry at first," she said. "When I heard, I didn't yell, but something in me broke. I thought, how could he let it go without even asking?" "I was drowning," he said quietly. "The business failed. I didn't want to tell you how bad it had gotten. I told myself I'd buy it back before you returned, that it wouldn't matter. But I knew. Even then, I knew it wasn't just a house." Her expression softened, though her eyes were sad. "And yet, somehow," she said, "you brought it back." He looked at her. "Not legally. It still belongs to Teresa, who seems to understand what it is," she said. "From the little I've seen, she's helping me preserve everything," he said. "The letters, the photos, the guest notes. We're creating an archive, maybe even a small exhibit, if people are willing to share." Janet's gaze lingered on him. Then she reached across the table and touched his hand. "I thought I had to do this alone," she said. "I thought the house worked because I kept it quiet, hidden. I didn't think it would survive anyone else's hands. But it has." She smiled. "Yes, and maybe that's the point. Maybe I held on so tightly because I was afraid no one else would know how to carry it. But you did." "I'm still trying," he said. "That's enough." They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, "Did you find the letter I left for you?" He blinked. "The one in the drawer?" She shook her head. "No, the one in the attic behind the panel near the chimney." He frowned. "I haven't seen that." "Go get it." He stood, confused, and made his way up to the attic. Dust and shadows greeted him. But he found the panel she meant, an old, uneven board behind the chimney stack, held in place with a single nail. He pulled it aside and found a small tin box tucked behind it. Inside, folded neatly, was an envelope labeled for Liam when he's ready. He brought it downstairs, hands trembling slightly, and sat beside her as he opened it. The letter was written in a steady, familiar hand. Liam, if you're reading this, then I know something has changed. Maybe you've discovered what this house really was. Maybe you've made peace with your own storms. Either way, I want you to know that I never built this place to be mine. I built it to be shared. You've always had more strength than you realized, and more kindness than you allowed yourself to show. I saw that in you when you were 5, sitting on the porch drawing pictures of whales with crayons. I saw it when you came home after college and offered to help repaint the front steps. This house isn't sacred because of what I did here. It's sacred because of what people brought to it and what they were willing to leave behind. You are part of that now, and you always will be. Love, Mom. Liam read the letter in silence. When he finished, he looked up at her, eyes stinging. You never stopped believing in me, did you? Never, she said. They stood together and moved into the living room. Janet walked to the fireplace and knelt beside the hearth, brushing her fingers along the smooth stone. It's strange, she said, to return to a place you never really left. He sat beside her. Would you ever want to start the retreats again? She looked at him thoughtfully. Not as they were, but maybe something new, something smaller, a gathering, a workshop, an afternoon of letters and tea. He smiled. I think a lot of people would come back. Then let's ask them. And so it began, not with a grand reopening or formal announcement, but with a simple gesture, a message sent to those whose letters still lived in the attic and the desk drawers and the shoe boxes beneath the bed. An invitation not to return to what was, but to help shape what could be. As the sun set, Liam and Janet sat side by side on the porch, mugs in hand, watching the light fade over the water. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was shared. Not everything lost needs to be found in the same form. Some things return changed, softened, deeper. And some houses never stopped welcoming people home. A week had passed since Janet's return, and the rhythm of the beach house had subtly changed once again. It no longer felt like a space suspended between past and future. It had movement now. Quiet conversations in the kitchen, pages turned in the living room, the occasional laughter between mother and son as they rediscovered parts of each other through stories long left untold. Janet had taken up her old routine with ease, moving through the rooms with gentle precision, watering the plants Teresa had added to the front porch, folding blankets with the same care she once used to prepare spaces for her guests. And though she still carried a trace of sorrow for what had nearly been lost, her presence in the house now felt like a steady hand, settling once more into place. One morning, just after breakfast, a knock sounded at the front door. Janet, wiping her hands on a dish towel, glanced toward Liam. Expecting anyone? He shook his head. No. He walked to the door and opened it to find Teresa standing there, a large, flat package wrapped in brown paper tucked under one arm. Hi, she said, smiling, eyes warm. Is now a bad time? Not at all, Liam replied, stepping aside. Come in. Teresa entered, and as she crossed the threshold, she met Janet's gaze. They had met briefly the day after Janet arrived, but the moment had been brief, friendly but not yet familiar. This time, there was something different in Teresa's expression. She walked forward and extended the package toward Janet. This is for you, she said. From me? Janet hesitated, glancing at Liam, then reached out and took the bundle. The paper was neatly folded, the corners crisp, sealed only with a small string. She untied it slowly. Inside was a framed display, an arrangement of letters, photographs, and small keepsakes mounted against a linen background. At the center was a single quote, written in delicate calligraphy. Some houses are made of memory more than wood. Janet's fingers traced the frame. Her lips parted, but no words came. I found a few things after you left, Teresa said gently, and I read many of the letters. I didn't want to overstep, but it didn't feel right just keeping them hidden away. I thought maybe they belonged here, on the wall, not in a box. Janet looked at her. You made this? Teresa nodded. With care. I hope it feels like a beginning. For a moment, all three stood quietly, the weight of the gesture settling in the room. Then Liam stepped forward and guided Janet to the side wall near the living room, a place where the light hit just right in the afternoon, where once there had been an old photograph of the coastline. He removed the nail, then helped her hang the new piece in its place. When they stepped back, the display seemed to anchor the room, as if the house had accepted it, as if it belonged. Janet looked at Teresa. "Thank you. Truly. You gave me something too," Teresa said. "You gave me the kind of story most people spend their lives searching for." I just walked into it. They sat down at the table, the three of them, and for the first time since the sale, the moment felt complete. Not reversed, not restored, but reimagined. Over tea, Teresa shared her own plans. She had recently applied for a small grant from the local historical society, hoping to fund a community storytelling program inspired by the house's past. She envisioned inviting people, former guests, new writers, even high school students, to come and contribute their stories, whether about the house or their own journeys. Liam listened with growing awe. "You're serious about this?" "I am," Teresa said, "because this place deserves to keep living, not in the past, but through the people it touches now." Janet sipped her tea, smiling faintly. "You're not who I expected to find here." Teresa laughed. "I'm not sure I expected myself either." Later, after Teresa had gone, Liam and Janet remained at the table. The framed display on the wall seemed to glow in the late morning light. Each letter and photograph a quiet reminder of the hands that had once passed through this space. "She's doing something good," Janet said softly. "She is," Liam agreed, "but it's only happening because of what you started." Janet nodded but didn't speak. Instead, she stood and crossed the bookshelf, retrieving one of the guest journals, those small notebooks she used to leave in each room for visitors to write in if they felt moved to. Many had been packed away, but a few remained. She handed it to Liam. "This one's empty," she said. "I think it's time we put out again." That afternoon, they placed it on the small table in the corner of the front room, beside a vase of fresh lavender and a pen. On the first page, Janet wrote, "This house has always belonged to the stories we choose to share. If you're here, you're welcome to leave yours." Beneath her words, Liam added his own. "Every moment here adds to something larger. Thank you for being part of it." As the sun began to set, a soft knock came at the back door. Janet opened it to find a woman standing there, slightly older than Liam, holding a canvas bag and a cautious smile. She introduced herself as Alina, a name Janet didn't immediately recognize. "I heard about the archive project," Alina said. "I think my mother stayed here a long time ago. She used to talk about a house on the coast with lavender by the front steps. She passed last year. I found letters in her things. They were addressed to you." Janet's breath caught. She stepped aside to let the woman in. Alina handed her the bag. "I didn't know if you were still here, but something told me to try." Liam stood beside his mother as she reached inside and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. The top one was addressed in neat script. "To Janet, for the quiet mornings and for giving me back my voice." Janet looked at the name. It was Marie Layton. She clutched the letter to her chest, eyes wet. Alina's voice was soft. "She never told me what happened here, just that it saved her once." Janet took her hand. "Then she told you everything you needed to know." That evening, the three of them sat in the living room, reading by firelight. Another story had come home, another thread woven back into the tapestry, and the house, now lit by memory and possibility alike, stood quietly ready for what came next. The last stretch of summer leaned gently into autumn, and with it came a quiet but growing transformation in the atmosphere around the beach house. It started not with major changes, but in the rhythm of the place. New voices in the garden, chairs rearranged for small gatherings, the subtle sound of writing, of old stories being told aloud and new ones taking root. It began with an invitation. Liam had spent several weeks digitizing letters and photographs, organizing stories by decade, theme, and voice. Teresa, energized by the response to her framed tribute and her grant application, began reaching out to former guests whose names appeared in the archives. Some responded with polite gratitude. Others sent back letters of their own. A few asked if they could visit. Janet, watching it all from the kitchen table or the edge of the porch, never interfered. But as more and more letters arrived, she began quietly preparing the house, not as a host, not as a guide, but as someone making room. It was Liam who suggested they host a small event, not a retreat. He said one morning over coffee, just a gathering, one afternoon, people who were part of the old story, and maybe a few who want to help write the next part. Janet didn't answer at first. She looked out the window, where the waves curled against the shore, slow and silver under the morning light. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked. "I think some already are." The plan came together quietly. Teresa arranged for folding chairs and a large outdoor canopy to be delivered. Liam printed short readings from the archive, anonymous selections from old letters, journal entries, and reflections. Janet contributed a few of her own notes, carefully choosing passages that had once helped others. A few locals volunteered to bring refreshments. Marion sent a recording of herself reading her journal aloud, along with a short letter addressed to whoever's sitting under the sycamore tree. When the day came, it was overcast but dry. By noon, more than a dozen people had arrived, stepping out of their cars with tentative smiles and hesitant steps. Some brought children or partners. A few came alone. Many carried envelopes, notebooks, and boxes, tokens of their own time in the house, fragments long held and finally ready to be shared. Janet greeted each person with warmth, never pressing for details, but welcoming them as if no time had passed. Teresa floated between conversations with natural ease, offering tea and answering questions. She had become not just a new owner, but a careful steward of the house's legacy. Liam stood near the garden gate, watching the mingling of timelines. People who had once shared rooms in different years, now sharing laughter, memories resurfacing with clarity and emotion. The gathering began with a few short readings. A former guest named Lynn read aloud a poem she had written after a retreat in the early 2000s. A retired nurse named Harriet shared a painting she completed while staying in the loft room, capturing the view from the porch in soft watercolors. Then Alina stood and held up the letter her mother, Marie Layton, had written but never mailed. She talked about this place every year on her birthday. Alina said, not always with words, sometimes just by making tea and sitting near the window. I didn't understand what she was remembering. Now I do. There were tears, but they were quiet, healing. No one pushed for explanations. The stories came like waves, some gentle, some sharp, each one part of a larger tide. As the afternoon light waned, Janet finally stepped forward. The group fell silent. "I never thought this house would outlive my own voice," she said softly. "But I think it has, and I'm grateful for that. I didn't build it to be a sanctuary. I just needed a place to feel like myself again. But you gave it a purpose I couldn't have imagined." She looked around, her gaze meeting the eyes of strangers who no longer felt like strangers. "This isn't the end of something," she said. "It's the beginning of a different way to listen." Later, as guests wandered to the house, some revisiting old rooms, others discovering corners they'd never seen, Liam found himself in the attic once more. He had brought up a display board, and guests were pinning small notes to it. Memories, photos, quotes in their time in the house. One note stood out. It read, "I came here as one person. I left as another, and both of them mattered." As he stood there, someone approached quietly, a woman in her late 40s, wearing a soft green jacket and carrying a small leather-bound notebook. "You're Janet's son, right?" she asked. He nodded. "I never wrote her a letter," she said. "I always meant to, but the words never came. Then I heard about this event and, well, here I am." He offered a gentle smile. "You're welcome to write one now." She looked at him for a long moment. "I think I will." Downstairs, Teresa had set up a table with supplies, blank stationery, envelopes, pens. A small sign read, "Write what you never said." Throughout the evening, guests returned to the table, quietly penning letters to their past selves, to Janet, to the house, to silence itself. Some placed them in a basket labeled for the archive. Others tucked them into their bags, unwilling to part with them just yet. As twilight settled in, Soft light strung between the porch posts glowed warmly. The gathering turned into something gentler. Shared meals, soft music, long pauses between conversations. People lingered. They walked the garden paths. They stood quietly facing the sea. And though no one said it aloud, everyone seemed to understand that something rare had taken place. Not just a reunion or a tribute, but a renewal, a quiet pact among those who had been shaped by a space, and now shaped in return. As the last guest departed, Liam stood with Janet and Teresa at the edge of the porch. The house behind them hummed with the residue of connection. Teresa turned to Janet. "Would you ever consider helping with more events like this? Even once a season?" Janet smiled, not as a caretaker, but as someone who had finally been seen. "Yes, I like that." Liam looked at them both, then out at the moonlit shoreline. He had come full circle, not to undo a mistake, but to understand the truth behind it. The house had never been about ownership. It had always been about offering space. And now, it had offered him something too. 3 months passed. The coastal winds grew sharper, carrying the scent of pine and salt deeper into town. The summer gatherings had faded into memory, replaced by cooler mornings, earlier sunsets, and the rustling sound of fallen leaves collecting along the pathways that wove through the garden behind the house. But inside, the energy remained constant, gentle, purposeful, quietly alive. Liam now spent most of his days at the house. Though he still kept his small apartment in Portland, he rarely stayed there. Something had shifted after the autumn event. What began as guilt had transformed into responsibility, then into belonging. He wasn't just helping his mother or assisting Teresa. He was becoming a part of the story himself, one page at a time. The digital archive project had grown quickly. With the help of a local librarian and a few volunteers, Liam scanned hundreds of letters, journal entries, and photos. They created a private invitation-only portal where former guests could log in and see pieces of past, contribute reflections, and even reconnect with others who had stayed at the house in different decades. The response had been overwhelming. Dozens of new letters arrived, some from people who hadn't spoken of their time at the house in years. A woman from Montana sent a cassette tape, recording of herself playing guitar on the back porch in 1998. A man from New York shared a photo of the journal page he had written during a retreat weekend, along with a story of how it inspired the first draft of a novel. A school teacher from New Mexico wrote, "I didn't just find peace there. I found the courage to change careers." Liam created a new section on the site called Echoes, a place for these stories to live alongside the older ones. No algorithms, no advertisements, just a simple, living library of memory and meaning. Janet watched all of it unfold with a kind of quiet pride. She didn't involve herself in every decision, nor did she try to steer the direction. Instead, she offered perspective when asked, encouragement when needed, and her hands, always her hands. Preparing rooms, arranging flowers, leaving notes for Teresa on the kitchen counter, like she had done for years before. One afternoon, Liam found her sitting on the porch with a stack of index cards. On each one, she had written a single phrase or question, gentle prompts she used to place on pillows or leave on bedside tables during retreat weekends. He sat beside her and picked one up. "What's something you're no longer afraid of?" She looked over and smiled. "I thought we could bring them back." He nodded. They still work. Later that week, Teresa invited them both to a small planning session for the next seasonal gathering. They met in the living room with tea and scones, sketching ideas onto notepads, perhaps a winter-themed writing day, maybe something centered around gratitude or the passage of time. They wanted to keep the gatherings intimate, rooted in reflection rather than structure. As they brainstormed, Teresa pulled out a folder from her bag. "I've been collecting feedback from the guests," she said. "Most of it is simple, thank you notes, suggestions. But this one stood out." She handed it to Liam. It was a typed letter from someone who had never stayed in the house, but whose parent had. "My father never talked about his time here," the letter began. "But after he passed, I found a photograph of him standing by the window, a cup in hand, a look of peace I don't remember seeing in his eyes before. I don't know what happened at your retreat. I don't need to, but I want to say thank you for giving him that moment." Liam read the letter in silence, then handed it to Janet. She took it slowly, and when she finished, her eyes shone not with sadness, but with something quieter, reverence. The house, once a place she thought she had to let go of, had expanded far beyond her reach. And yet, it still held her in its center. That evening, after Teresa left, Liam remained on the porch alone. The sky was pale and streaked with gray, the sea restless but not angry. He opened his notebook and began writing. It wasn't fiction. It wasn't a letter. It was a record, a beginning. A house stood by the sea. At first, it was only a shelter. Then it became a threshold. Over time, it became something softer, a keeper of stories, a resting place for voices. He paused. It wasn't about the house. Not exactly. It was about what the house gave people permission to do. To pause, to speak, to be held in stillness. As the days passed, the space they had shaped took on new life. The back room, once used for writing sessions, was now a small resource library filled with donated books, letters, journals, and artwork from guests. The old guest room was renamed the listening room, with armchairs, notebooks, and a standing rule that no phones or devices be allowed. It was not a place for silence. It was a place for presence. Liam began hosting monthly letter nights, where people could come and write anyone, living, gone, real, imagined. Most of the letters were never sent. But that wasn't the point. At the end of each evening, guests could choose to burn their letter in the small outdoor fire pit or leave it in a locked wooden box in the sunroom labeled Letters That Belong to the Sea. Janet came up with the name. No one ever questioned it. One Saturday, Liam returned from the post office, carrying a parcel wrapped in thick brown paper. Inside was a leather journal with an embossed note. For the house that let me return to myself. There was no name, just an entry on the first page, written in a steady, grateful hand. I thought I had forgotten how to start over. This house reminded me that beginnings are not always loud. Sometimes they are as soft as tea being poured, or as quiet as footsteps on worn wood. He added it to the shelf in the listening room. The final phase of the project came slowly. Liam began collecting anonymous stories, not just from former guests, but from people in town, neighbors, and even visitors passing through. He created a digital companion site called Stillness Shared, inviting people to submit short reflections about moments in their life where quiet led to change. The idea wasn't to talk about the house, but to let the spirit of the house reach people who had never been there. And it worked. Submissions arrived from across the country. A woman in Chicago wrote about the morning she decided to walk away from her corporate job and become a caregiver for her father. A man in Arizona shared the story of the morning he watched the sunrise after 6 months of depression. A teenager in Maine submitted a 2-sentence reflection. I stopped pretending. That's when I finally slept through the night. Janet read them all. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed. And one day, as they sat together on the porch, she turned to Liam. You turned a mistake into a ministry. He shook his head. You built the foundation. I just found a thread again. They sat in silence. The sea moved, as it always did. The wind danced through the lavender. The porch creaked faintly under their chairs. It wasn't a final moment. There were no final moments in a place like this. Just circles folding into themselves. Stories finding new shapes. A house standing, still